Hey, there's been this question on my mind for a while now, which is who's allowed to suffer in a society? To whom do we grant the right to express hardship? And I've been thinking about this question lately because of today's podcast guest. I have spoken to Vladimir, who is a conference interpreter from St. Petersburg with uh, a lot of experience in the German-Russian cultural dialogue. He's been doing this for quite a while. He holds a PhD in German, has been teaching German in St. Petersburg, and he left Russia when the partial mobilization took place in 2022. I thought this question of who's allowed to express hardship is quite poignant because in an increasingly black and white discourse world, it seems to me that the impulse to see every individual as a representation of a nation state or a particular group has grown stronger again. And in those impulses, we sometimes forget that there are a lot of nuances and that obviously not all people are the same. Vladimir and his family made the journey to Germany over quite some time, and he explained how this has been for him and his wife, and he was so open to share how this experience was for him. I think it is an individual story that includes hardship, that includes personal experience that are challenging, and perhaps listening to other people's challenges might as well broaden our perspectives. It certainly did broaden my perspective. So I hope you are going to enjoy this conversation. I'm Alice, your host, and now let's get into the podcast. Welcome, Vladimir. I'm very happy that you agreed to join the podcast today because I think the story that you're going to share with us today is something that a lot of people do not really think about. It's been 3.5 years since the full-scale invasion of Ukraine, and the focus in the public in Europe has naturally been mainly on Ukrainians who left their countries. But you're one of the people from Russia who had to leave their country or chose to leave their country. And yeah, I'm very curious about your perspective and your experiences, what you've encountered over the last year. So thank you very much for the willingness to talk a little bit about that, and welcome.
Yeah, you're absolutely welcome, and the pleasure is mine. I am really glad to join you on this occasion, and I'll be glad also to share my views and perceptions of the last years too.
Let's start pretty much from the beginning. 3.5 years ago, as I already mentioned, the full-scale invasion of Ukraine started, and I think it didn't take you a lot of time to take the decision to leave the country. Tell me a little bit about those first moments where it became clear to you that you may have to leave your home, your family, everything that you know, and leave St. Petersburg.
Yeah, well, getting back to the beginning, maybe it makes sense to say a couple of words of who I am and where I started. So at the time where the war against Ukraine started, 2022, I was a pretty well-established conference interpreter in St. Petersburg and also teacher at 2 universities. And by that time, I had the feeling that the life is more or less established and won't probably get in any unusual direction anymore. We have recently bought a new apartment in the historical center of St. Petersburg, and we had a perspective of the next 10, 15 years, I would say. And with the outbreak of the war, suddenly the usual world broke down. In my own case, it meant that in 3 weeks, I lost almost 6 months of work contracts, which already were on my schedule till September 22, and they all disappeared with every next day, one by one, until I realized, okay, now I have no idea whether I have a chance to interpret between Germany and Russia at all in the upcoming months, when not years. In the beginning, you had this feeling that, okay, that lasts for maybe a couple of weeks and then be over, and still some life after that begins. But 1 month passed, then another one, the next one, and then we realized, okay, this story is not going to end so quickly. Although in Russia, you always had these small deadlines. We thought, okay, now by the 8th of March, for some reason, something will end, or by the 9th of May out of symbolism of the date, etc., etc. But again, with the time, you realize the war is not going away, and somehow the situation is getting only worse. And then the so-called part mobilization was decided, and it was end of September. And that was actually really beginning of a completely new chapter. And I must say that the life doesn't prepare you for something like that. Even if you have a lot of experience in your life, you think that you know things about life, but once something like that happens, you realize, okay, you have to be on your own and try to somehow act and see how it goes. And in my case, it was really the decision of almost 3 days after this part mobilization was on the table. I remember me talking to my wife, and my wife at some point of time asked me the direct question, what happens if tomorrow you get this invitation to the army? And my answer was something mumbling about, yeah, well, probably I will have to go because it's like the state authority and what choice do I have? And then I realized, okay, that's actually not an option, because if you go there, you just disappear as a human being, and you most likely are dead in a couple of days.
I just wanted to ask you about this particular period because I remember when the partial mobilization started, there were a lot of reports about men basically receiving their drafting notice on the street from public authorities. There was a lot of speculation about how this actually would work out. Do you know if such things happen to anybody in your environment? How strict the drafting rules were? Because it came to a big surprise, the partial drafting, to a lot of people, and that it was pretty wide scale. Do you have any observations or experiences from your immediate environment, how this actually unfolded?
Yeah, there was a lot of nerves and stress in the air, that's for sure. Maybe just to give you one example, you know, this service like eBay Kleinanzeigen in Germany, or something like eBay, where you can put something to sell or buy some stuff from other people. And I had, I don't know, some skis or something else put there. And at some point of time, a guy reacted back that he wants to have my skis for the sum I wanted to have for it, and is ready to pass by and fetch them. And by that time, I realized, okay, might be that it's actually not a real person, but someone from this drafting commission who in this way tries to disguise and find me in the address where I'm not registered, because to be able to give you this drafting paper, people from the military have to basically fetch you at the place where you are registered. In my case, it was my parents' home, where I was not living de facto. But I thought, okay, maybe that's a guy who realized I live there, and that's a chance. So I asked my wife to give the keys to the guy. Of course, it was just an ordinary person, but that's just to give you an impression of what was in the air.
Yeah.
There was a period a bit later where also in St. Petersburg, policemen with people from these drafting committees were waiting at the entrance of a huge building. You know, in St. Petersburg, you have a lot of buildings where you have like 25 stories, and there is only one possibility to get out of this building. And at this door, there was a couple of men standing and checking the documents of every young men leaving the building or entering the building. That was, of course, scary. Also, St. Petersburg is also one of the cities which Russian authorities tried not to shatter so strongly, because the most people who were drafted in the first months were from national republics and rather from small villages or towns. But since in Pittsburgh you had this rush, I think that in first days I started calling friends of mine, and well, you call every next person and get the answer. I'm sitting in a taxi going to the Finnish border. I'm sitting in the airplane. I'm waiting at the entrance and the railway station to go to Kazakhstan. I'm sitting in the car and driving to Georgia. And basically in 5 days, 80% of all my male friends from St. Petersburg left the city in one or other way.
And what was your journey?
On one hand, I had only 3 days to pack my whole life in a suitcase and a rucksack. That's basically what I left with. And on the other hand, in these 3 days, I managed to even create 3 routes. I had like a plan B and even a plan C. My route worked out with a plan A at the end, thanks God. I was going to Finland and I left Russia, I think 5 days before the Finnish border has been officially closed for all holders of Russian passports. And yeah, that was also a journey connected with a lot of nerves because my wife brought me to the railway station, I think at 3 o'clock in the morning. And then I was going by train to a smaller town on the Finnish border in Karelia. And there were literally only men sitting in this train. And not a single person spoke to each other. Everyone knew that they sit in this train out of the same reason, but it was a pretty tough ride at the end, thanks to a good friend of mine who lives on the border with Russia on the Finnish side. He organized basically a refugee camp for such men as myself in his own house. At the moment that I arrived, there were 7 men sleeping there, apart from his wife and 2 children. And he helped just with the first psychological steps and just welcoming on the other side and just giving you some space. And then as I came to Finland, I had like a week to realize what's going to be next because I had no idea for how long I left. I had no idea where I'm going to go next because the first step was to get over the border and that was the main part of the plan. In the next 6 days, I just said I had chosen 6 countries which were possible as a next step, and I every day have analyzed one of the countries from a set of criteria which I formulated for myself and tried to choose what can be done next. And luckily enough, parallel with that, I found a way to apply for German papers. And the answer was that this way was open, but to be able to apply for the papers for myself and for my family, I had to spend the next 3-4 months somewhere outside the Eurozone and outside the Schengen. So I had to leave Finland pretty quickly to be able to apply for this program. And at the end, after this analytical week, I chose Turkey. And I left for Istanbul for next 3.5 months. So actually, thanks to friends of mine, I once translated a book from German into Russian from a German journalist and author, and I knew that he married a Turkish girl and lived in Istanbul. So I called him, and he told me I already came back to Germany. I have 1 more week and then I'm in China, but I will give it a thought. I know a lot of people from the German community in Istanbul. Maybe I will find someone. And then just an hour later, he gave me a number of some guy called Till. I have never heard of him before, and he told me just call Till, and maybe he will provide you a living, a flat. You can discuss with him, and depending on the results, maybe you can live in his place.
So basically, the pathways which were open with like humanitarian visas was not immediately possible. You had to go to Turkey outside of the Eurozone for a while. In this moment, did you feel like you are becoming a refugee yourself, or were you in too much of a stress situation, just trying to figure out the next step, and you didn't really realize the grand scheme of the development that is actually unfolding?
Yeah, probably the idea with the grand scheme comes in the future after some while passes. In the moment, you're too much in the tactical phase because at that moment, I could plan only for, I don't know, 5 hours time. Although the whole life before I was used to planning for 1 year, but then you just realize, okay, now you have to act step by step. Otherwise, you are just psychologically lost and you have no surface whatsoever. You have just to somehow keep on moving and try to disturb yourself from the thought that you have no idea where it's going and that you, for the first time, had to leave your wife and daughter at home. And yeah.
So, but you managed to go to Turkey and you arrived there and you managed to as well stay the necessary period. What was it like to come to a city pretty much without preparation, without having close contacts and figuring out the next 12-week plan, so to say?
Well, the life in Turkey was a very strange experience, also a very interesting one. The guy who I contacted at the end was a German teacher, and he was teaching at the German-Turkish university founded by Angela Merkel and Erdogan, and he had a Russian wife. So at the end, they let me live in the house they bought for themselves and were renovating. They lived in a flat, and in this house, the renovation work was going. And I had the possibility to clean one room. I had no water. I had only electricity and one clean room. The rest was like with one white dust. And I had one small IKEA chair, sleeping mattress, and sleeping bag I brought with myself from St. Petersburg, and one small table. And that's basically was where I lived and slept. And during the day, I had the possibility to stay in the apartment and use internet and hot water and cook, etc. So there was also such a phase where one of the reasons why I chose Turkey, because from Turkey you could easily fly to different countries, and in Turkey the Russians didn't have to apply for any additional papers for 3 months. You could leave there just for 3 months as a tourist, basically. And I knew by the time I left that I had 3 business trips, one in Georgia, one in Azerbaijan, and I needed a place from where I could reach the countries. So basically, I lived in between of these business trips. I knew that, I don't know, in November, I'm going to go to Azerbaijan for 3 days. And then it's like you pack your suitcase out of this nowhere with building dust and sleeping bag. Then you land in Azerbaijan and you have a business trip like in old good times. When you live in a 5-star hotel where you interpret people, you walk in the suits, etc., etc. And then you are brought back to the airport in Istanbul, and the VIP Turkish taxi brings you to this outskirts of Istanbul. And then you get into the house and realize, okay, during 3 days, there were people still building. So the first thing you do, you put your suitcase, take something to wash the floor clean so that you can enter the room, so to say. And that was the time of basically waiting for the German authorities to make a decision whether they confirm my application for this humanitarian visa for Germany or not. And the same process was going in St. Petersburg with my wife and daughter in the meanwhile.
How long did this process in total take for the decision for you, of course, at first, and then for your wife and daughter to be approved for this type of visa?
It went surprisingly quick. For the German authorities, for sure. I think that I applied at the end in the beginning of October, and by the middle of November, I actually had the answer that I have the right to cross the German border in the upcoming 3 months. But for my wife and daughter, it lasted longer. They applied at the same time, but they still didn't have the answer till mid of December, I think. And we were waiting for it because the German authorities told us we have to cross the German border together and arrive at the place where we were directed to as a family, all 3 of us. So we were waiting. And then at some point of time, I realized, okay, I have only 10 days left till my official time of Turkish free visa days runs out. And then I wrote an email to the German authorities stating the situation, that I have only 10 days left. And if they do not provide me the possibility to enter Germany on my own without my family, then I will have to move out from Turkey, find a different country to live in again for a couple of days till they provide the visa for my family. And surprisingly, after that, they suddenly told, yeah, okay, you can arrive in 10 days. And then in these 10 days, I realized, okay, the Turkish period is over, and you actually can buy tickets. You actually can start planning what's going on next. And at the end, I flew to Germany already in January 23 in the very beginning, basically straight after the Christmas Eve and the New Year's Eve.
How does this work? I have no idea. When you receive that type of approval, when you're granted a humanitarian visa, where do you start? Like, okay, you buy tickets, but what happens after that? You arrive, and then?
That's a very good question. Yeah, the first question for me was where do I have to arrive? And that is really stated in the papers you receive at the German consulate. To get these documents, you go to the German consulate in not European country where you applied for. Together with your visa and passport, you get some papers, and there is written you have to contact the so-called temporary accommodation facility or dormitory, and you have address, you have a town where you are basically directed to, and there you have to arrive and to register yourself and to start the whole bureaucratic process of getting started in Germany. And in my case, in our case, it was a place called Unterwössen. And when I read it, I realized, okay, that's a place in Germany I have never heard about in my life. And that is pretty bad sign because I've been to all 17 federal states of Germany, and I think there are not so many places in Germany which I haven't seen by that time. And then I started Googling it, and I found only two pictures of Unterwössen online. One was showing a children playground with a tractor on it, but with magnificent mountains in the background. And the second was, I think, just mountains. And that's basically everything I could find about Unterwössen online, apart from the fact that there is a regional local newspaper of Unterwössen. So my first thought was, okay, that's some small place somewhere deep in Bavaria and the border with Austria. And I have to do everything possible to somehow find a different place in Germany because I know no one in Unterwössen and I know a lot of people in Germany, and it makes sense to go somewhere where I know someone. But at the end, it wasn't possible. I had to arrive there. So basically, you buy tickets, you arrive at this facility, and a representative of authorities of Bavaria welcomes you there and gives you the key. You sign that you got the key, and then the whole bureaucratic process starts.
I guess in your case, you at least had the upside that you're fluent in German, so you could speak with most authorities if they did not speak in a thick Bavarian accent. I don't know if that was the case. I personally struggle with the Bavarian accent. I don't really understand it very well, but at least you could understand what people demand of you and what the paper that you receive is saying. So basically, you arrive to the small town, probably beautiful landscape, Alps in the background, but you're in this challenging, dire situation that you have to rebuild your life from scratch with your wife and your daughter, who at that time did not speak German and probably as well were very shocked by the new life situation that you found yourself in after a couple of months, where a year earlier nobody would have imagined this situation. Explain to me how you've perhaps tried to find a little bit of normalcy in this situation, in this temporary residence that you were placed in Unterwössen. Did it ever feel normal?
Yeah, it did at the end, but it took some time. The first impression was that you really arrived in a magnificent, beautiful landscape. Unterwössen is a small village. It has under 4,000 inhabitants. It is situated in a valley which is surrounded by mountains from three sides, and it basically has one piece of every service. It has one supermarket, it has one haircut studio, it has one gasoline station, it has more than one restaurant, but still most of the things you have there is only one piece. There is no railway station there. It's only bus connection, and it takes 40 minutes by bus to get to the nearest railway station, and the bus stops going by 19 o'clock in the evening. So after 19 o'clock, if you didn't reach Unterwössen, you stay there where you ended up, waiting for the next bus at 7 o'clock in the morning. I think that the change was so big that at the beginning, I didn't even try to compare it to my normal life, because St. Petersburg has I think, now more than 7.5 millions. And getting from the city with 7.5 millions to a place with under 4,000 is a pretty life-changing experience from all points of view. Also is a factor which helped a lot, because psychologically, you just don't have a chance to compare this new life with your old one. I personally had the feeling that I, for some reason, landed in a very beautiful summer house, like a dacha, like you say in Russia. That's a summer house which almost all people from bigger cities have in the surroundings. So it's small house. And for some reason, you are staying there not for summer, but for a longer time. And it's for some reason located not close to St. Petersburg, but somewhere in the Bavarian Alps. But apart from that, it is just an absolute irreal place where you could never imagine yourself. Looking back from the perspective of today, I would say that's probably the best thing which could happen to us and to our family, because this place was so peaceful and calm that from psychological point of view, you really could settle down and breathe out and just enjoy nature, walk around, breathe air, look at the mountains. It was really healing because we needed this psychological healing time. We spent almost half a year apart. And that was the first time in my life that I spent so much time apart from my family. The same for our, by that time, 6 years old daughter and my wife. So that was the first impression. And at the same time, it was a very welcoming place. Probably it also is a feature of a village, but in a village, you have a very strong bond between people living there. Each new person arriving is something new, which almost everyone of the village notices. So, okay, maybe a refugee arriving and a temporary accommodation facility is not so special. But for example, in this facility, we were the only Christian family, the only white family, if I might say so, or European looking at least. At the same time, I was speaking German. So for everyone in this village of Unterwössen, we suddenly became a family from this refugee house who they could talk to. And that was pretty quickly clear that we are different. Because we lived on the ground floor, and from this ground floor, we could open the door, and we had a small terrace. And on the other side of the street were normal Bavarian houses. And 2-3 months later, we put a small plastic table outside and, for example, had our coffee in the morning there, or I don't know, ate our evening meals with a glass of wine sitting at this table. And the German people living on the other side saw that we are actually doing pretty much the same they do. What other people from this house have never done, because you never see people from Muslim families sitting outside and drinking something and talking in the evening or in the morning. And then people started just going on the other side of the street and asking, hello, we see that you are different. Who are you? What is your story? And as I could answer in perfect German, they also heard our story, and that pretty quick brought us into the community of this village. So here in Turvessen, we were called the Russian family. I think something like a month after our arrival. Also because my wife drove the whole way from St. Petersburg over Scandinavia by car with our daughter, and we had the Russian plates on the car. And people passing by saw the Russian plates with the Russian flag and were also interested. Who are they? And when they saw me by the car, they started talking. And yeah, we pretty quickly realized that we actually do know a lot of people in the community.
I mean, it's quite interesting the way you are explaining it from several perspectives. Like, obviously, with language, your cultural knowledge of Germany, this definitely helped you to mingle with the people, in contrast to when you say there were majority Muslim families who perhaps felt shyer and insecure about talking to other people. But I as well find it interesting from the point of time, 2023, the tensions were still pretty high about the war. I think now, to a degree, the interest has gotten lower as well because there's Israel, Gaza just being very dominant. But in 2023, people were still very much rooting for Ukraine. There's a lot of black and white perspectives on Putin as the enemy and Europe versus Russia. This is going to be the new cleavage. And I find it interesting that in such a small scale environment, in a small scale ecosystem, that people approached you as an individual and not as a representation of some vague group. And permitted you to have some individuality, you and your family. I would have not particularly expected that, to be honest. The way I remember that time was very confrontational and very much black and white. Did you as well experience anything in that direction where you were not perceived as an individual, but as a representation of basically the enemy side?
It's interesting because I actually didn't know what to expect. I had no idea what the position of people in the place where we landed would be. I was also, as you said, surprised that so many showed very profound interest to our case, to our story, but also just for the possibility to talk directly to people who were affected by the war, which local people only heard and read about in the news. And a lot of people also saw in our family a chance to ask all the questions they don't know who to ask. At some point of time, there was a man who walked his dog every morning at the same time as we brought our daughter to the kindergarten, and we just greeted each other at the same route every morning. And then 3 weeks later, he saw me in the main street of Unterwössen and just came to me and said, you are the Russian, right? And I told him, yeah, okay, I'm the guy from this Russian family who arrived in this facility. Probably, yeah, that's why you are referring to me like that. And he said, I just wanted to see you in person. I'm so glad that you arrived here, that you decided to leave the country. You decided not to go to this useless war, that you found a way to come here. Please stay here. You are here absolutely welcome. And I really appreciate you and your family coming here. We see that you are really nice people. And after that, you are just left speechless. You stand in the middle of this village. The guy with the dog passes by and walks by, and you just stand there and think, what has happened just now? Because you have no idea who he is. You don't know his name. And it's just on the personal level, a person telling you, it's nice that you are here. Thank you for taking this decision. We are glad that you are here. I think about what you asked about whether I, at some point of time, or anyone from my family was referred to as representatives of aggressor country who attacked neighbor, etc., etc. I think that we actually had this comprehension in ourselves, but at no point of time I heard something like that from people from around us in Unterwössen. Actually, also this paradigm of saying that everything is black or white was not really present in Bavaria. I was also surprised by that, but people, they were interested in talking about the whole ongoing war situation, but they were not really putting a label on you, like you are from Russia, you're a bad Russian or a good Russian or whatever. They were just talking to you as to a person who has more knowledge about different region in the world they are at the moment interested in. So yeah, I do not remember a situation where someone referred to me as to representative of an aggressor or something like that. We in this village were mostly considered as people, newcomers who arrived and who also tried to contribute to the life of this village, because we, as people from a big city, try to do everything possible to settle down and find some way of feeling normal again in these new circumstances. And being from a big city, you tend to act quick and think quick. And if you, I don't know, you have a lot of ideas and you look for ways how to make them true. And we both try to do it with my wife all the time. So we pretty quick got also known in this village as people who are new, who are technically refugees, but de facto are trying to bring something into the community.
For you, the experience was generally positive and welcoming, yet you left the town and you moved from very south of Germany to the very north of Germany to Rostock. How did that?
Yeah, we left at the end out of very simple reason. In Unterwössen, there was almost no chance to find any rental accommodation apart from this place where we stayed. And we had only one room without doors for us and a child, which is very inconvenient. And in Unterwesen, there was no chance to find any job whatsoever for me or for my wife, because basically there you could work only if you know agricultural things and know how to do something with land, or you can work with hands.
So
Being a
manual labor.
plumber or something else would bring you there pretty quick to a pretty nice, well being, so to say. But if you wanted to do something with your head, there was almost no job at all. My hope was that moving to Rostock, I personally get more chances as interpreter, because Rostock was close to Berlin. And if something happens with German-Russian interpretation, then it's in Berlin. And there we got an opportunity to rent a flat in Rostock. And that's why at the end we made the decision to do this journey almost through the whole of Germany. I think that only if we went to Flensburg, it would be a longer journey, but it's hard to find a longer route than from the Austrian border to the Baltic Sea.
I mean, as well culturally, like if you compare the states of Bavaria with the state of Mecklenburg-Vorpommern, where Rostock is located, different history, different perspectives, different mentalities. So it is quite a big change within the German society as well as a shift. But Rostock is a university city, which has been one of the thriving ones in the northern east of the country. So how did arriving to Rostock and orientating yourself compared to when you arrived to Unterwesen?
It is different. It is still change and movement. So basically, we had to start everything again. Not from scratch anymore, because in 1.5 years in Unterwesen, we fought through the most bureaucratic questions. You never can fight through all bureaucratic questions in Germany, but we had most of them in the southern Germany. This starting over process in Rostock is more complicated, or has been more complicated for us than in Unterwesen, even though we had a family of friends of mine here who supported us really without end. I'm really grateful to them as much as I can be, because yeah, they used all their contacts in the city to make some first acquaintances as possible, etc., etc. But still, Rostock being a town, or yeah, maybe a small city, automatically makes it less personal than a village. No one really shows interest to a family arriving in a block of flats, even if there are only 8 people living in this block of flats. But still, basically, the neighbors are the only ones who you maybe talked to in the few first days. And again, we arrived and we wrote a Bavarian postcard to every person living in the block of flats where we went into, and we put it in the post box, just introducing ourselves and writing who we are and suggesting that we meet in a week at the backyard just to introduce ourselves. That's the only reason why we had contact with the neighbors, but the rest of the people doesn't really show any interest to any newcomers. At the same time, you really have a different mentality, that's for sure. You can see it and feel it in the people. I would say that in Bavaria, people were really more easygoing. Well, it's partly also a question of wealth, for sure, because in Bavaria, people are more easygoing because most of their basic problems are covered, and they live in beautiful nature, and they just enjoy it, and I don't know, go riding mountain bikes or skiing or traveling, and they do work a lot, but still they rather enjoy life. Here in the northern part, you don't have this part of enjoying life, at least in Rostock at all. That was a huge change in the mentality, because I think that the basic rule here is, if you want to enjoy life, go somewhere else. You can see it in the city, even on the level of the embankment in Rostock, which is a very long one, has a huge potential. You can imagine how you can use it in dozens of ways. It is used only in 4 months in the year. You even can't find an ice cream during the summer on this embankment. If I used it, I would put a lot of different stuff you could buy and enjoy the seaside and add some comfort. But people in Rostock rather say, no, comfort is for these capitalistic people. And if you're born and raised here, you should be the real one. And all these enjoyments of life are not true.
I mean, as we're recording this, it's just 3 days after German Unity Day, where there's been a lot of discussion about still lacking opportunities and negative sentiment in the former GDR states, where Rostock is obviously as well part of that history. So I can imagine that this is something that you feel in many Eastern German cities still. How has your arrival to Rostock changed in terms of opportunities for you and your family?
That was one of the main reasons why we moved at the end, hoping that in a bigger town or city we could find more. In my case, it really worked out because you mentioned Rostock having a university, and my hope was that I also could find a place to work there, because I taught for 18 years altogether at two universities in St. Petersburg. And that partly worked out because university was actually the first and only institution which answered my call for work and agreed to at least talk to me. And I actually could start teaching surprisingly Russian, which I never expected me to do, already 2.5 months after arrival in Rostock, which is pretty quick. So they gave me the opportunity to teach the Russian course from scratch, just having seen me once in May, and then telling, okay, we have the feeling that you have the energy to do it. If you are ready to teach Russian, feel free to do it. Maybe in the future we'll give you the opportunity to teach German as well, because I have my diploma as German teacher, and I have PhD in this subject. So from this point of view, the opportunity was there. The closeness to Berlin also provided some opportunities. For my wife, it was more complicated because she didn't speak German from the very beginning. And she started learning German in Bavaria and then in Rostock. Unfortunately, in 95% of cases, receives the answer, first learn German, then come back to us, we'll talk to you. After that, it doesn't matter what working experience you have. It doesn't play any role who you are. Learn German, then come back to us.
You have an incredibly tiny English-speaking labor market in Germany. You have obviously in Berlin and in Munich, where startup culture, but yeah, pretty much outside of Berlin, Munich, and some corporates which are scattered across Germany, there is basically no English-speaking labor market. That is just a matter of fact. But now, as you're working, you have an apartment now, which is a better situation than the temporary residence in Unterwössen. How do you see perhaps the next steps, or what is your time frame of planning? Because when we start this conversation, you explained that you were only able to plan for 5 hours or maybe for the next day. Take it one day at a time. How's your time frame now?
It is getting back to normal, more or less. I think that now we plan for at least half a year, and it is actually the way the Germans usually do it. Probably the Germans plan even for longer, for a year or sometimes two. But I would say that, well, right now I already know pretty much everything I would be able to do till the end of this year. The time frame for staying here is the one which ends up with a question mark. We definitely will stay here for a couple of years, because the next time we move will happen when I or my wife find a working contract worth leaving for and moving for. In my case, I am thinking of moving to the level of international organizations, because I already made the first steps on this route, and I already work as interpreter or translator for several UN organizations, and it is a process. To be able to work there with a contract, probably you will need 5 to 7 years. In my case, I will have to learn additional language to be able to apply for any UN position at all, but at least it is a way which I can imagine going. For the next years, we definitely will also stay here because of the school of our daughter. It's, I think, the best thing which happened to us in Rostock. I'm 410% happy with the school and my daughter as well. So I think as long as everything stays more or less as it is now, we probably will stay here, looking for a contract somewhere with UN possibilities, in my case, most likely.
What I wanted to ask you as well is about how you feel the perception of you and your family is in Rostock, viewed from different types of people you meet in the city. Do you have the impression that people perceive you at all? Because you as well said it's a lot more anonymous, more isolated. People don't really care that much, but you are still at the university and you're in contact with students and with professors. So how would you say do they perceive you?
People do care, but it is more complicated to get in touch with people. Once you found a way to do that, and found a way to speak for a couple of hours, you most likely also will find a way to get through this first wall of contact and then to the person. It's basically working through the system of Verein, these German associations. In my case, it's sports because I play badminton since 20 years, and that's also kind of entry into the community. University definitely is also another one because there, as you correctly said, are the teachers and professors who you can get in touch with. The more you teach, the more students you know, although students come and go and you don't really stay in touch with the students at the end. So being perceived is actually not really a situation. Maybe it will be more for my wife as soon as she's more into questions of communication between different groups of people and citizens and inhabitants. She works in the field of psychology of communication. And when she moves to the next level and gets a job, I'm sure that she will be more in the community. She already had a chance to start guiding tours for the tourists in Rostock in English this summer, and already through this work, she has a small network of people from the tourism field. So I think it will develop with time. But I don't think that we are really perceived by anyone in the city actively as people from St. Petersburg who arrived here.
Let's imagine this horrible war in Ukraine finally comes to an end. The sooner the better. Can you imagine you and your family going back to St. Petersburg as soon as this happens?
As soon as this happens, no. I would hope that when this finally happens, after some while, it would be possible again for me to travel back to St. Petersburg, at least to see the family. Whether we will make the decision to come back and keep on living in St. Petersburg depends on a lot of different factors. First of all, you have no idea who is in power when the war has ended. If the power has changed, you have no idea in which direction it has changed. At the moment, I'm really glad that my daughter is not part of the Russian education system and gets her education here in Germany in the school which she visits. And I think the more years pass, the more complicated it will be to come back and get into the old new life at home. For me, it's also the question of work because, for example, if I stayed in St. Petersburg through all the years which I am in Germany right now, I probably would completely give up my job because it wouldn't be possible to earn for living as a freelance interpreter or translation in St. Petersburg at the moment. There are no German-Russian connections whatsoever on official level. With English, you have so many who still are there that you won't earn enough. So that would mean for me that I would change my profession, which I could keep thanks to moving to Germany. So I don't know, answering your question, not straight away, but I would love to see St. Petersburg at some point of time again. I would love to live in time where I can invite my friends to St. Petersburg again and show the city to them because it's still the most beautiful city I have seen in my life and which I'll, of course, miss.
What is your hope as of now?
Yeah, my hope is that the war in the European part of the world comes to an end at the end and that we can freely start speaking to each other again. For me personally, the hope is again that countries and people start talking to Russia again and not only demonizing the country and thinking that the whole country is represented by only 10 people. Because for me personally, also the German-Russian relations is a very personal story. I basically lived them for 15 years, from 2018 till 2022. For me, it's also a big loss that the Germans do not interact with Russians anymore, even though they still have the personal possibility on individual level, but they still almost never do it. And the longer it gets like that, the more complicated it will be to ever start talking again. And my absolute firm belief is that you only can have peace between people and countries when people from these countries talk to each other.
Thank you very much for sharing your perspective and your story. It sheds pretty much a light on one perspective, this individual perspective of Russians who had to leave, who chose to leave. I think a lot of people have not heard this perspective. So for you personally, I wish you a lot of luck and perspective, and obviously for us all that there will be peace. Thank you very much.
Thank you too.
Thank you for listening to this episode of European Glimpse. This is a passion project of mine, and it would make me very happy if you subscribed or shared this episode with a friend. Now I'm curious to find a new guest. Are you a journalist, a scholar, a student, or perhaps an avid observer of society? If you live in a European country, as well outside of the European Union, reach out to me or recommend somebody I should speak to. I would as well love to hear your feedback on this podcast, as I'm always trying to improve, and my email is europeanglimpse@gmail.com. Take care.